June 19th, 1865. You may know it as Juneteenth. On that day, Major General Gordon Granger rode into Galveston, Texas, and read the General Order Number 3. All slaves are free. A promise that was finally written down and read aloud, shared by all. Except freedom, as it turned out, was not the same thing as a signature on a page or a law. Along with that promise should have come another one. Something along the lines of 40 acres and a mule, perhaps, some land, a foundation, some hope for the future. That promise was broken before the ink was even dry. Environmental justice is a struggle to finally keep this promise. It's the recognition that emancipation without land, clean air, clean water, without the right to live and thrive, is not emancipation whatsoever. Juneteenth is not just a celebration of the past, but it's a measuring form for the present. Are we free? Or have the chains simply changed form? Today I want to talk about what freedom means in the 21st century and why we cannot have it without environmental justice. I want to share with you a little bit about where I grew up. Paterson, New Jersey, the Silk City, built on the beautiful falls of the Passaic River, powered by immigrant labor, scarred by deindustrialization, and held together by the sheer will and perseverance of its people. Before it was Paterson, it was the homeland of the Lenni Lenape people, Pataquatan, the place where the river splits. They were displaced, removed, pushed further west. Yet another broken promise and another treaty dishonored. I grew up in a neighborhood that was predominantly Black and Hispanic. I'm a white passing Latina, Ecuadorian, and in that neighborhood, on those streets, I was the one who looked different, whose skin gave me a pass that I didn't necessarily ask for or want all the time, but it was there. And that experience is what taught me what Juneteenth is really about. It taught me solidarity. The way a Dominican grandmother sent food home with my family when money was tight for our family. It was the way a Black pastor opened his church doors when the city refused to fix the lead pipes and neighborhoods were in crisis. It was the way that neighbors who had nothing shared literally everything they could because they understood that freedom meant nothing that if you faced it alone. It also taught me injustice. Paterson has some of the highest asthma rates in New Jersey. The schools are underfunded, the parks are absolutely neglected, and the recycling plants, the bus depots, the highways, they all ended up in our backyard. When you asked why, the answer was the same shrug. The same unspoken understanding that this is where the poor people live, and this is where the brown people live, and this is where we put things that no one else wants in their backyard. I didn't have the words for it then, honestly, but I didn't know to call it environmental racism. I didn't know to call it environmental injustice at the time, but I knew that we were not free. Not really, maybe not yet. I knew that no one in power also seemed to care about us in that community. Those people were not statistics. They are human beings full of love and dreams and fight. They taught me that solidarity is not a strategy. It is a way of life, a way of being. And that's why I'm sharing this with you today. Juneteenth is unfinished. Now, I want to share about the system that creates this injustice, because injustice doesn't happen by accident. It is absolutely designed. And until we understand the design, we cannot break it. Here is what they did not teach you in school. Over 95% of all money in existence today was created by private banks as debt. And now when you take out a loan, the bank does not lend you money that someone else deposited. No. The bank types numbers into a computer, ones and zeros, out of nothing. And that newly created money comes with a string attached. You must pay it back with interest. Don't forget. This piece of paper, dollar bills, they have printed on them, "In God we trust." But what it really means is, I promise to pay the bearer on demand. A promise, but whose promise and to whom? When the enslaved were promised 40 acres, that promise was broken. When treaties promised indigenous nations their land forever, those promises were also broken. When redlining promised white homeowners safety, it was based on a lie. The black and brown lives were worthless. The dollar bill is a promise too, and like all these other promises, it serves those with power and extracts from those without. Now, here's the catch. Where does the money to pay the interest come from? I'll tell you, nowhere. The banks do not create it. You have to go find it. You have to go borrow more money and create more debt just to service this debt economy that has been in for hundreds of years. Do you see it? It's a system that requires perpetual growth and expansion. More stuff being dug out of the ground, burned and thrown away and replaced, and so on and so forth. This cycle, detrimental cycle, goes on and on. But if growth stops, the whole thing collapses. No new loans, new money. The Great Depression was not a natural disaster. It was a monetary one. The money supply shrank by 1/3 because the loans dried up. This is the engine that drives environmental injustice. The system must grow, and growth requires extraction, at least the system that we have in place now. Extraction requires sacrifice zones, and these sacrifice zones by design are placed on bodies and lands of those with the least amount of power. The same people who were never given their 40 acres, who were pushed into marginal lands, and who were redlined into pollution. Are you kidding? Juneteenth promised freedom from bondage, but this system that we've been living in up till this day, the debt-based monetary system, is the new form of bondage. It chains all of us to perpetual growth and expansion, and some of us to pollution, displacement, and death. Economists talk, or they like to talk about substitution. If oil gets expensive, they say, we will just use more capital, more labor, better technology to figure this one out. But here's the issue. This comes from biophysical economists like Hall and Clickard. Energy is not just another input. It is the ability to do work. You cannot substitute capital or labor for energy itself. A machine without fuel is just a sculpture. A worker without food is just a corpse. Here is the key concept. Energy return on investment, EROI. If you haven't heard of this, it's a new way of thinking of energy. Early oil had an EROI of 100 to 1. 1 unit of energy invested gave you 100 units back. That massive surplus built everything we call modern civilization, from our highways to computers and universities and hospitals. That surplus also built the wealth that has extracted from enslaved labor and stolen indigenous lands, and that connection is absolutely direct. Now, we are down to EROIs of 10 to 1, even 5 to 1, or lower. Fracking, tar sands, deep water drilling, each unit of energy invested gives us back less and less and less. This means a larger and larger share of the economy's energy must be fed back into energy sectors themselves. Less left for everything else. It's a structural drag on growth. And here's the punch. Our debt-based monetary system requires perpetual growth, but our biophysical reality, declining EROI, climate change, resources absolutely becoming depleted, that makes perpetual growth impossible, my friends. The system is eating itself. And as it eats itself, it eats the most vulnerable first. That right there is environmental injustice. And that is the unfinished business of Juneteenth. Now, let me show you what the system looks like on the ground. Environmental justice is the principle that no community should bear a disproportionate share of environmental harms. Environmental racism is the violation of that principle, where the systematic denial of a clean environment is based on race. As scholar Robert Bulliard, the father of environmental justice, put it, race is the single most important factor in predicting the location of toxic waste facilities in the United States. Now, nowhere is this more visible than in Cancer Alley, similar to Flint, Michigan. The 85-mile stretch between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, lined with oil refineries and chemical plants. In St. James Parish, the population is nearly evenly split between black and white residents. But the pollution is not evenly split, I'll tell you that much. Since 1958, at least 20 out of 24 plants have been built in the majority black districts. No industrial facilities has been allowed in the majority white districts in nearly 50 years. 7 times as many people are expected to be diagnosed with cancer than the national average. 7 times. This isn't an accident. It's the result of decisions, zoning maps, permit approvals, political choices, and affluence. Those choices have roots. They go back to redlining from the 1930s, where federal policy drew literal red lines around black and brown neighborhoods and declared them hazardous for investment. Banks refused loans, insurers refused coverage, and cities just straight up refused services. Patterson was one of those redline communities. The 4th Ward, marked in red, where I grew up. Today, those same neighborhoods have the highest asthma rates, worst housing stock, the least access to green spaces. Now, redlining was outlawed in 1968, but its legacy is baked and ingrained into the land. Historically, redline areas are still more likely to be in floodplains, still experiencing some of the worst urban heat, and hosting polluting industries. This is what environmental injustice looks like. And this is why Juneteenth is far from over. When the General Order Number 3 was read, it did not say, all slaves are free, but they will be poisoned. It did not say, but their grandchildren will drown. Freedom means the right to clean air, to breathe in fresh air. It means drinking clean water. I know a lot of communities in more affluent spaces and more white predominant areas don't even think about clean water as a right. It's just their standard. Freedom means the right to live on your own land without being poisoned from it. The logic that created Cancer Alley is the same logic that dispossessed indigenous peoples. And indigenous peoples were never promised Juneteenth. They were promised treaties, and those were all broken. Before there was slavery, there was colonization. Before there were plantations, there was dispossession. And before redlining, there were reservation systems. The Cherokee were promised their land forever. Then gold was discovered, and the Trail of Tears, where 4,000 died. The Lakota were promised the Black Hills in the Treaty of Fort Laramie. Then gold was discovered. Then Custer, the hills were taken. The Supreme Court later acknowledged the treaty was violated, and the Lakota still wait for reparations, some they may never get. The Navajo were subjected to uranium mining to fuel the nuclear weapons program. Miners were never told the risk. Their children played in the tailings. The water was poisonous. Today, cancer rates are astronomically high. Mines are abandoned, and the cleanup never happened. Now, let me bring you to present-day Louisiana. the traditional homeland of the Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw tribe. My apologies for not pronouncing that correctly. We have here the Isle de Jean Charles. For generations, they lived off the bayou. Shrimp, oysters, fish, crabs galore. The oil and gas industry carved 10,000 miles of canals through these wetlands. Salt water intruded. The plants that held the soil died. The land began to sink. Isle de Jean Charles has lost over 98% of its land area. In 2016, the federal government gave the tribe $48 million to move to higher ground. It was supposed to be the model for climate migration and mitigation, or maybe adaptation is a better word. But it has now become a cautionary tale. Amy Handon, a resident who now lives in the new Isle, says, "Don't do it. This was supposed to be a model and it's simply not worth it. I would not recommend it to anyone." And this process was designed for them, not with them. The money flowed through state agencies, not tribal leadership, not the people that were actually living and taking up space in these lands, their homes. They were not included. They were not seen as stakeholders in this process. The tribe here is not federally recognized either, so they could not receive the grant directly. They were promised a community center, a health clinic, a market, a powwow ground. They got a homeowners association that sends them letters about parking on the grass instead. The bayou they dug in the new development is not the same. The fish are not the same. The water is not even the same. Grand Bayou, a fishing village accessible only by boat, inhabited by the Atacapa Ishak people. No electricity, no running water, no roads. They just have each other. And they have the bayou. The state's coastal master plan does not include the Grand Bayou. No levees, no restoration, or funding, as if they do not exist. This is the same logic, the same dispossession. The belief that some people's lives, some people's homes, some people's sacred sites are acceptable sacrifices for profit. Juneteenth was for enslaved Africans, but the promise of freedom, the promise that all people have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was never extended to Indigenous people. Their treaties were broken. Land was stolen, their children were taken to boarding schools, and devastating things were done. If Juneteenth means anything to you, it means that promises must be kept, and that promises of Indigenous peoples have not been kept. So what do we expect for other communities? Here's what bankers, engineers, regulators just do not understand. Land is not just dirt. Land is identity, it's memory, it's healing. The great Black feminist thinker Bell Hooks wrote about this. Before the Great Migration, Black people in the South were connected to the land. That connection gave them pride. It gave them personal power. It gave them reverence for the life they lived. When they migrated north, they left that land behind and something broke. She writes, "You cannot be healthy in mind, body, and spirit if you do not have a healthy relationship with the earth." Her grandfather said to her, "You see the sun? The white man cannot make it rise. Man is not everything." That knowledge that there is something bigger than the powerful gave enslaved people the strength to resist. And that is the true spirit of Juneteenth. The same wisdom lives in Indigenous traditions. The Lakota phrase, "Mitakuye Oyasin," all my relations, includes not just people, but the earth, the waters, the animals, the sky, and beyond. When you understand land as a relative, you simply cannot poison it. You cannot sell it. You do not treat it as collateral for debt. Juneteenth promised freedom from bondage. But the debt-based system creates a new bondage to debt, growth, extraction, expansion, and the indigenous worldview offers a way out. Land as our relative, not a commodity. Enoughness instead of endless accumulation. Thinking 7 generations into the future and not next quarter's profits. This is not sentimental. This is a different operating system for our economy, one based on reciprocity, not extraction, on kinship, not domination over another. So I wanted to bring this full circle and talk about sustainability, because Juneteenth was a promise, and sustainability is how we can keep this promise going. We can actually honor our word. Not the watered down version of sustainability like green consumerism or recycling while our planet burns. I'm talking real sustainability where living in safe and just spaces between 2 boundaries is a reality for all. The social foundation where every person has access to food, water, health, education, housing, a voice, and peace. That's the spirit of Juneteenth that I want to bring into our everyday life today. Freedom, full participation, full dignity for people. The ecological ceiling is inevitable. Climate stability, biodiversity, clean air and water, intact ecosystems. This is the condition for keeping that promise, because you cannot be free on a dying planet. Between our social foundation and ecological ceiling is donut economics, Kate Raworth's framework for the 21st century economists. It is the space where everyone has enough and no one has too much. Billionaires, I'm looking at you. It is the space where the promise of Juneteenth is finally fulfilled. Here's a hard truth. Our current system is structurally incapable of living in this space, because truly the debt-based monetary system requires perpetual growth, and this planet is finite and we are finite. Let's get that absolutely right. The system externalizes costs onto marginalized communities and future generations, and that is environmental injustice, the opposite of Juneteenth. Because the system treats land as a commodity, not a relative. But the land isn't fooled. Sustainability is not a compromise. It's not the less bad thing to do. It's a completely different operating system. And truly, it's the only way to keep our promise of Juneteenth. That requires a couple of things. Monetary reform in the form of money being created as a public utility, not a private debt. Interest-free or low-interest lending. The abolition of the growth impairment. Because freedom cannot be built on debt. Simply that. If you want to learn more about this, I would highly recommend reading a book by John Boyk, A Framework to End Poverty and Maximize Well-Being, called Economic Direct Democracy. Again, that was John Boyk. Look into that if monetary reform is something you have interest in. Along those lines, energy transformation, a rapid, just transformation to renewables, where it's community-owned energy, full cost accounting for pollution, and because simply freedom means the right to breathe. Restorative justice is another component, where reparations for slavery, colonization, and dispossession are in check. Land back for indigenous nations, and climate loss and damage payments are paid up. A broken promise must be repaired, and this is how we do it. Active restoration. And finally, the last component that I can think of is a new economics, from GDP growth to thriving within boundaries, to gross domestic happiness and well-being, from extraction to regeneration. How about we shift from domination to kinship? Because that is what Juneteenth demands and deserves. The writer Adrienne Mari Brown teaches something called loving awareness. And this is the practice of seeing systems as they actually are, without illusion or denial, and choosing to act still. Not looking away or scrolling past or feeling overwhelmed. Not saying, well, that's sad, but what can I really do? As I'm sure most of us fall into as we are doom scrolling on our tiny computers day in and day out. Loving awareness means letting the grief in. Because only when we truly feel the magnitude of what is being lost between species, cultures, the future, the graves of our ancestors, will we really have any hope of acting with intention and urgency. Loving awareness without action is just sentimentality. And Juneteenth is not sentimental. It is a demand. It's a promise begging to be kept. So let me tell you what collaboration could look like. Let me tell you who is doing the work of freedom. In Louisiana, the women of Rise, St. James, and Inclusive Louisiana are fighting for a moratorium on new petrochemical plants. They are not just opposing pollution, they are building a vision where solar energy, local food systems, and community land trusts all exist and elevate one another collectively. Sharon Levin, founder of Rise St. James, says, "We are not sacrifice zones. That is the spirit of Juneteenth. Put your foot down and speak up, because it's true. People are not sacrifice zones." In Indigenous communities, the Land Back movement is returning land to Indigenous stewardship. The Rights of Nature movement is winning legal victories, where rivers are being granted legal personhood with guardians appointed to defend them. Just look at the Klamath River. In monetary policy, public banking is growing. The Bank of North Dakota, the only public bank in the U.S., has weathered crises better than private banks. Other states are exploring public banking because if money is debt, then we can create a different kind of money too. In cities around the world, like Amsterdam, Portland, Glasgow, donut economics is guiding policy now. It's becoming foundational. The goal is no longer GDP growth, but striving and thriving within boundaries. These aren't fantasies, they're actually happening right now in the world around you. They are the work of Juneteenth echoed, the work of making freedom tangible and real. But they need you. They need all of us. Because the promise of Juneteenth was not kept by one person. It will be kept by many. See the connection between the red line on 1930s mapping and the cancer diagnosis in the 2020s hospital. That is environmental injustice. See the connection between the broken treaties and the poisoned wells. That is the unfinished business of colonization. See the connection between Juneteenth, the delayed, incomplete, betrayed promise of freedom, and the systemic sacrifice of Black and Indigenous communities in Cancer Alley and Isle de Jean Charles in Paterson, New Jersey. See the connection between the debt in your wallet and the debt we owe to future generations. They're the same exact story, the same system, and the same promise that has been broken and waiting to be kept. And it's time to pay back our promises. Not with more promises, let me tell you that, but with land, reparations, a new monetary system that serves life, not debt. With an energy system that does not demand human sacrifice. With loving awareness, the willingness to see the whole truth and act on it. The people of Cancer Alley are not disposable. The people of Isle de Jean Charles are not collateral. The people of Paterson, my neighbors, my family, my teachers, are not sacrifice zones. They are the promise of Juneteenth and the reason we must keep fighting. If we really listen, they could show us a different way. A way based on not extraction and debt and growth, but on care, reciprocity, on the understanding that we are all, as Bell Hooks wrote, touching the same earth. Freedom is not freedom until everyone is free. until every community can breathe clean air, and every child can drink clean water, until every grandmother can stay on her land. That is environmental justice. That is Juneteenth. And that is a promise we must finally keep. Thank you, guys.